Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with David and Midell to discuss his latest film that he directed but also co-wrote, which is the film The Ritual, starring Al Pacino, which is about the demonic possession of Emma Schmidt, which took place in around 1926. So David, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Like I was saying off camera, I watched the film, and it was hard in the sense of just, I mean, first of all, how powerful the film is in general. But you know what? There are people actually that aren't familiar with her story. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about her story and what a demonic possession is.
Sure. Emma, the story that we tell in our film is the true story of the possession and exorcism of Emma Schmidt, which happened in Erling, Iowa, which is a small town in kind of rural southwestern Iowa in 1928. And uh, Emma had been afflicted with kind of spiritual uh, uh, malaise and challenges for a long time. There was a lot of she had a lot of kind of psychological, psychiatric testing, and obviously, they determined that an exorcism was necessary. And the exorcism was performed in 1928. She had actually had one performed earlier. The main some of this I don't want to give away too many spoilers about the film. Some of it is revealed in the film, but that's the story that we tell. And this exorcism became what is essentially the most highly documented and widely publicized exorcism in American history. The kind of main lead exorcist, Father Theophilus Reisinger, was a Capuchin friar, and he was profiled in Time magazine a couple years after this happened, and he kind of became known as America's exorcist in the years after this happened.
Wow. I mean, as I'm watching the film and I'm thinking about the research that goes into this, right? So I'll give you just a quick background. We're filming a TV show now about objects that have attachments. And recently we had an object that was possessed. And I sat in on this demonstration, we'll call it. And that experience, it was traumatizing to be in a room, to hear things. And I had my rosary beads and the voices and we heard it, we filmed it all, and I had to leave the room. So as I'm preparing for this and I'm watching the film and I'm thinking about you, I mean, I'm assuming one, you did a lot of research on this. I don't know if you sat in on an exorcism or if you tell me about your experience of just going through these documents, if what kind of research you did, if you sat in on one. Tell us about that, because not everyone is familiar with what takes place during an exorcism or just a reading.
Right, right. No, a huge part of what I do as a filmmaker is research. I almost approach, the films that I've made have largely been based on true stories or inspired by true stories. So I sort of do approach these projects like a journalist does. I dive very, very deep into the research. My producing partner and I did have the chance to speak with a couple of exorcists who are actually ordained exorcists. We also spoke with several priests who are spiritual advisors to exorcists. And one of the, you mentioned that it was a really kind of difficult experience to sit in that room. And one of the really telling things that one of the priests mentioned to us is that his colleagues who are exorcists, he always finds that they all have trouble sleeping. They all have, they all kind of, he mentioned that that's a very common thing for exorcists to have difficulty sleeping because of, either what they're exposed to or what they see and what their eyes have seen, what their ears have heard. He mentioned, and I thought that was a really interesting and telling little detail about the toll that being around these types of phenomena, how it can affect people. But yeah, very, very deep into the research. There's a lot of documentation about this case. The primary document that we used was a document called "Begone Satan," that was generated essentially from the notes of the priests who participated in this exorcism. And that document kind of became a teaching tool for priests who were studying exorcism. And you may have a better definition of it than I do, but as far as I have gleaned, I mean the main purpose of an exorcism is to it's essentially a specific set of prayers that are delivered either to God or to the actual spirit, um, to hopefully free the object or free the person of the spirit that's tormenting them. Again, you may have a better
No, no,
definition
no.
than I do, but that's as far as I understand, as far as all the research that I've done, just your general kind of definition of what an exorcism is. Um, but yeah, it was a really fascinating process. I grew up in a Jewish household. I had a bar mitzvah and everything. So I was kind of approaching the subject matter. I think that helped me in a sense approach the subject matter a little bit more, almost as a journalist would. Um, and I developed such an appreciation for, even more so than I had before, the Catholic community, many of the rituals that outside of the exorcism ritual, but many of the just general rituals. We had many individuals on the cast and crew who were very devout Catholics. My producing partner is a devout Catholic. And Patricia Heaton, one of our cast members, actually is a very devout Catholic. Her sister is a nun. So she was actually able to really help us out with a lot of, you know, details and customs, oh, this wouldn't have been done this way in 1928. It would actually have been done this way and those kinds of things.
No, no, that yeah, no, I'm a big fan of her acting and just in the film. But no, you're right, people would have picked up on that. But you said a few things and just as I'm thinking, one is from the research I've done, right? Is some of these possessions, right? They can come from objects, they can come from rituals, they can come from like so in a sense that a lot sometimes we're allowing these forces to enter our spirit, right? And
Mhm.
for us, we've been really researching a lot of objects that have these sort of demonic possessions that are attached to them. And people don't, some people don't believe in these demonic possessions or believe in the enemy of the devil or however you want to phrase it. But we see in this film, and it's documented that it's true. So, and going about it as a journalist, and I love to take on projects. I take on a lot of sports projects because I don't, no offense, like sports, right? So I come
Right.
at it as a very, evenly keel sort of perspective. So coming from your background, I'm assuming when you went into this, you had mixed feelings about it, but did you experience anything when you were working on this that you look at now, or even during the time saying that this just doesn't make sense in the sense of did you feel a spirit? Did you feel a force? Did something happen during the filming? I've heard stories on Nefarious where things did happen from priests and the directors that did that film. Did anything happen? Even the Passion. I mean, we've heard stories. So did you
Right.
experience?
You know, during the actual, I mean, it was a hectic film shoot, as any film shoot is. They're all stressful, they're all hectic. Um, we were lucky enough to have the parish priest who was helping us out. We kind of he was generous enough to offer us his church and facilities to shoot parts of the film in. He was generous enough to bless the set many times throughout shooting, so I think that was helpful. I definitely, when I first started doing the research on this case, I had to take a step back at one point because I was really freaking myself out. Just I've always considered myself a fairly kind of scientifically minded person. I look at facts, I look at data, I look at evidence. I have a lot of family members who are in scientific and medical fields. So I've always kind of looked at the world from that kind of perspective. But what really, really fascinated me about this story, and one of the reasons that I wanted to tell it, is that as I was reading some of the things that happened, I was like, how could this have a strictly scientific explanation? There has to be something else that was happening here, and they talk about, I know that the church is very the church is very diligent about, when a case of possible possession is suspected, they do an investigation, and there has to be a determination that an exorcism is almost used. I don't know if this is quite the right term, but it's almost used as a last resort once all psychiatric and possible psychological treatments have been exhausted. Um, I was thinking to myself as I was doing the research on this case, some of the things that happened during this case, how could they have a scientific explanation? There must be something else that was going on here, outside of just what is strictly scientific. So that really kind of caught fire in my imagination. It's one of the things that really fascinated me about the case. Thankfully, I don't know that because we were our the priest in our parish was generous enough to bless the set multiple times. Things went pretty smoothly from that perspective. But I definitely was. I had to take a step back during the research process because I
Did you lose
was.
sleep?
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. I remember when I first started doing the research, my family was out of town. I was alone. I was alone in our home. And the deeper I was looking into it, I was like, okay, I have to stop for the night. I have to like put The Office on or something, something to get my mind off of it because I started hearing sounds and I was so I was really I had to take a step back, especially that first kind of couple days that I was doing the research because I was alone. And it just really kind of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I'm telling you, I know exactly what you mean. Even last night, as after I watched this, I promised myself I wouldn't watch it at nighttime, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, I needed to put something on, like you said, like a Seinfeld episode,
Right.
just to sort of clear your mind because for me and for you, I mean, whether you think it was you experienced it or not, or it really happened, either way, something was going on. But the other thing too, and I know your background, you worked with prior to making films, you worked with people that had disabilities or mental disorders, we'll say.
Yeah.
And one thing too, and you mentioned it, but we do have to be clear, not all of these cases are, we'll call it demonic possession. Some of them, like you said, they do major research to make sure. I had a case recently, someone reached out to me and sent me videos and stuff, and clearly he was having a mental breakdown. Maybe he was off of his medication. He sent
Sure.
me videos and photos, and we did research on it too, and we realized that it wasn't but he thought and he really believed that there was a spirit in his house that was after him. And he was communicating with it, and he sent me all the data. And I've had multiple people reach out to me after doing the research. We realized that this was not the case. Sometimes after
Right.
investigation, we find out that they were on their medication or something. Maybe they were on drugs or they had PTSD. There's always something. But in this case, like you said, there was so much research. And before the Catholic Church or other people perform, exorcisms, there's a lot of research which sort of validates this point. And I know in certain dioceses, they do have groups of priests and deacons that come together to perform exorcisms. And I've heard stories. So this is as accurate as it can be. So tell me just about your background. How did you sort of use the research and the data from your, regular job in Korea, and how did you apply that to this project?
Yeah, no, that was a really, really important consideration because like you said, I worked. I was a special education teacher working with students with disabilities. I was a behavior therapist for individuals with autism, and I'm actually on the autism spectrum myself. So these are really personal issues for me, and I wanted to make sure, in all the work that we do, I it, I want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence and paying respect to individuals who really do struggle with mental health challenges. And that kind of relates to the point that I was making previously because you know coming from that kind of scientific medical background, I thought to myself, because you're right, a lot of cases that are investigated by the church are determined to be have a psychological cause or a psychiatric cause. In fact, the vast majority of cases that are investigated by the church, the person is referred to medical treatment. In the vast majority of the cases, that's the case. That's what happens, and so they are very discerning about about making sure that there wouldn't be any other cause. And part of what really fascinated me about this story is I thought to myself, well, boy, even if yes, the vast majority of cases are of course, they do have a psychiatric root or a psychological root, but if even
Mhm.
0.01% of them there's something else, that's a pretty fascinating and terrifying thought. That even in such a small percentage of them, maybe there's something else that's involved, and it really kind of just sparked my imagination. But I think that one of the through lines in a lot of the films that I've made has been my films tend to ask questions about how vulnerable people are treated by others, by society, by other groups of people, by more privileged people. My films tend to ask questions about how we treat vulnerable people. And this film, in a sense, is no different. This film at its heart is about a really vulnerable woman who was struggling, and she was suffering quite a bit. And the film is about a group of people who put themselves at really serious physical risk, emotional risk, spiritual risk to come together and try to alleviate her suffering. So, even though it's kind of wrapped up people look at people view this film as a horror film and it's supposed to be scary and all those kinds of things. And I think it is, but at its heart, that's how I've always viewed it. It's right in line with the other films that I've made in that it is asking a question about how this poor, vulnerable woman is treated and the sacrifices that other people make to try to help her.
Wow. I mean that's beautiful. You're right. And but you know what? Sometimes it's good that someone that wouldn't necessarily want to watch a film the way you described it in that genre will turn on a horror film and say, but the message is still clear. So they're going to watch a film or watch this film not realizing that that's the core message, assuming it's a horror film, and then walk away with something different saying, "Wow, it really spoke to me." Because that is a great reflection question. How do we treat people that, are marginalized? Or how do I treat somebody that suffers from mental health disorder? We're doing a film now, another documentary on mental health, right? Because we need to break the stigma. Someone that suffers from mental health can't even speak openly about what they're suffering with. And there's
Yeah.
power in being vulnerable. I mean, you speak about what you're suffering from. I'll tell you a quick story before you go, but I was in Sing Sing speaking at a group of inmates who were most of them were there for 30, 40 years. And I asked this guy, tell me about the power of being vulnerable. And he spoke in front of all these inmates talking about how powerful it was for him to cry and to be open, right? And not to be, what it was expected of him in prison, but to be open and caring and loving. And through art, especially, he was able to break that stigma and break that mold, and his life was transformed, even though he was incarcerated. But there's power in that, power in being open and vulnerable. But I think that's a great message. So I don't remember, I don't recall, but in the film, did they mention how this possession first started? I know in the film, Al Pacino mentioned something, but I don't recall. How did it first start?
Well, it's funny. It's funny you asked that question. Let's see. I'm trying to think how I can phrase it without revealing too many spoilers, because there are kind of some spoilers associated. The backstory is sort of revealed a little bit throughout the film, but I'll say that Emma Schmidt was an adult by the time that this particular exorcism happened, and she had been suffering for a very long time. Um, and there's been a lot of speculation about, what the cause was. Was it trauma from her childhood? Was it proximity to the dark arts and the occult? Was it a combination of those things that kind of opened a wound inside her that allowed these influences in? There's some speculation about that we sort of address in the film. But I'll just without giving away too many spoilers, I'll say that she had been suffering for a very long time. She was an adult by the time this exorcism happened, and she'd been suffering for decades.
Yeah, though that part I remember, but but we won't give away anymore. But I wasn't clear how it first started, and that's what I was like. You said it could have been the rituals, demonic forces introduced into her life. That's what I
Yeah,
was.
there's, as with any story that was, as with any story from 100 years ago, there are no audio recordings, there are no video recordings, there are no interviews. There's some interviews with Father Theophilus, but there aren't any interviews with Emma Schmidt or anything like that. So, the archive, as with any story from nearly a century ago, the archive of information, there's conflicting information here. One source will say this, another source will say this. So, what we did was we sort of tried to just do our best to take educated guesses about exactly, when and where and how it started. Because, the archive, as with many stories that happened long ago in history, the archive has some conflicting information in it.
No, but you did a great job. So what's next for you? Do you think you're gonna, I mean, obviously the genre that you create, what you mentioned earlier, but do you think you're going to continue to, like, what do you think you're going to continue to make? Films that, what do you think?
I think so. I really the films that really speak to me tend to be films that ask questions about um, how vulnerable people are treated. All of the films I've made have asked that question in different ways. The film that my producing partner and I made before this film was about, it dealt with law enforcement, and it asked questions about how law enforcement treats communities of color, and again, people with mental health challenges and cognitive disabilities and low income communities and those kinds of things. So I don't know, genre wise, I don't know. I don't know if I'll make another horror film or what the genre might be, but I definitely want to continue exploring that core question of how we or society or people treat the most vulnerable people among us.
I love that. It's so important because it gives us that opportunity to reflect on how we treat people. I think you're
Yeah.
completely right. David, it's really an honor to meet you, and I love the conversation. And it's a great film, and there is so much within that project, that the film that you did, and there's so much you could discuss with, you and I could discuss. And I advise people to go see it. Now it's being released. Is it June 10th?
In the US, June 6th.
June 6th in the US, and then
In the US, June 6th, exclusively in theaters. And I would say, try to see it in the theater because, it'll look great at home, it'll sound great at home, but nothing beats that theatrical experience. So I would recommend to everybody, try to see it in the theater.
would you recommend people to buy popcorn? Because I guarantee the popcorn will be all over the place.
Yeah, it's I think those poor the poor guys
Usher.
who have to clean up the theater afterwards, they probably expect it with any horror film. The theater's going to be covered in popcorn. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I advise people to watch it. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through words and actions. God bless you.